Thank you everyone for joining us, also from the States, from Israel. I see London in the crowd. I see Australia here. So we have today tonight the privilege of having with us Yaniv Levy, a Golan native farmer and tour guide. And so he's going to take us through the incredible story of Keshatot, one of the most special sites in the Golan in Israel. That's it. Without further notice, Yaniv, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yaniv. I live in the Golan Heights. I grew up here and lived in Australia for 5 years in Melbourne. I came back to Israel. I was basically working in the IT industry, and I decided I wanted to start working as a tour guide, which I'm doing currently alongside with farming, basically. So I volunteered as a kid in excavations in Gamla, and later on in places like Susita and a few other places in the Golan Heights. And also I got married in one of the ancient synagogues in the Golan Heights in Katzrin as part of my enthusiasm for ancient synagogues here in the Golan Heights. So that's it. So we're going to talk about Keshatot. The name, firstly, the name Keshatot is a new name. It was given recently by a committee in Israel. Before that, the place was called Keshatot Rechavam. And before that, it was called El Kanatir, which means in Arabic, the mother of arches. And you'll see in a minute why it was called that way. And that's the role of the name. We know a lot about this village, the Jewish settlements in the Golan Heights, and yet we know very little, as you will see pretty soon. The photo here that you can see, the green area, that's the site from the village, from Keshatot. That's what you see. And let's start. So where is it? Where is Keshatot? So Keshatot is in Israel. It's in the northern part of Israel in the Golan Heights. And as you can see here, it's located on a ridge, on the ridge above the lake, the Sea of Galilee, Lake Kinneret. And it's just below the ridge line. So it's just in the beginning of the valley, below the upper part of the plateau of the Golan Heights, as you can see. And the reason is the springs, the water. It comes out below the volcanic layer. And so if you want to build a village at that in the old era, in the Roman era or the Greek era, you have to build it right next to the water, and that's what they did. So where do we start the story of this village? We started, well, we know there were Jewish settlements in the Golan Heights from the Bible. Basically, the whole area was called, wasn't called Golan, it was called Choran or Bashan, and there was a city called Golan. And that city vanished. We don't know where it is. But when the Greeks came, they named the whole region Golan. And when the Greeks came, we don't know for certain where Jews lived whether they lived or where they lived in the Golan Heights. And then it all starts basically with Alexander Yanai. Alexander Yanai, the Jewish king, the Hasmonite king, basically occupies the Golan Heights from foreign people who lives there and establishes a capital city named Gamla. I'm sure you heard of it. And he also establishes a few Jewish settlements. And from that era, there's a constant Jewish settlement in the Golan Heights up until later on, where the Jewish settlements disappear from the Golan, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes. So this is the map of the Hasmonite kingdom, and the darker area is where Alexander Yanai basically occupies new territories, including the Golan Heights, and makes it a Jewish region. Basically, from what we know today, there were foreigners, non-Jewish people living there, and they were mostly pushed. Some of them were forced to become Jewish, and some of them didn't, and they were pushed towards the northern and the inner parts of the Golan Heights. Here we have a map of Jewish settlements in the Golan Heights that we know of. I actually had to add a couple of synagogues onto that map because just in the last few years we found two new synagogues that we didn't know of before. One is right next to Natur, which is on the other side of Keshatot, and one is just on the shore of the lake of Lake Kinneret, Sea of Galilee. Another synagogue was found over there recently, and they're also being excavated. I'm going to leave for now the timeline, talking about the Jewish synagogues and all at the Greek and Roman era and the Byzantine era, which are the periods that we will see later on, which the place was built. And I'm going to jump forward. The reason I'm doing it is because in the modern era, we don't know much. We didn't know about Keshatot until this guy, Sir Lawrence Oliphant, in 1884, shows up in Keshatot, or in a place called El Kanatir. He recognizes the place, and he actually mentions it in a book called Haifa, or The Life in Modern Palestine by Lawrence Oliphant. You can actually find it on the internet. You can read it. I can, oops, didn't mean to do that. I'll paste the link for the online reading later on in the chat. He comes there. He's enthusiastic for. He's really looking into all the archaeology, but mostly he looks for Jewish settlements, synagogues. He's paying an Arab guy to show him places in the country where there might be some ancient ruins. And he really is interested in finding synagogues and Jewish settlements. He's part of a movement at that era that tries to prove the Bible is real. There's a starting debate at that time whether the Bible is a real historic accurate book, or is it just a fiction and it has nothing to do with Israel. And a lot of people from Europe are starting to show up in Israel, in this region in general, and look for relics and look for places that they can identify in the Bible. Some at that era, quite a lot of sites in Israel are found, like Tel Dan, for instance, which is mentioned in the Bible, and a few other places. At that era also, there's a lot of excavations in Jerusalem. So Oliphant writes about it in the book. He brings along with him another scholar by the name of Schumacher, which draw this picture. The Arab sheikhs brings them to this spring, and this is what they draw. As you can see, there are two arches, two trees, and there's water. There's water over there. This is a drawing, so I can't say this is very accurate, or I wouldn't be able to say this is very accurate. However, a few years later, another two scholars come to the place by the name of Kohl and Wanziger, two German scholars, and they take a photo in 1905, and they take a photo of the place, and it looks pretty similar. And as you'll see in a second, it was as he drew. This is while he's in that place, the Arab sheikh tells him, look, this fountain, this place with the arches is very nice, but there's another site right next to it and you have to see it. And when Oliphant sees this place, and you can see, this is how it looked in 2003, but this is how basically Oliphant saw it as well. And it's a ruin. You can see there's a building that collapsed in this place. And he instantly looks at it and he says, this is a Jewish synagogue. That's Oliphant in 1884. If I was an archaeologist, which I'm not, or an academic, I would say he didn't know what he was talking about, because there's no proof at the time that this is a synagogue. We can see that there's a big structure here, a huge building with huge rocks, but I can't say it's a synagogue. There's no sign here to see that there's a synagogue. Later on, we'll see that fact changed dramatically. I also put photos here from recent time. That's my family. And as you can see, the arches were there before the archaeologists started excavating the place and looking into it in depth. And in 1995, after a few archaeologists started excavating some of the places, they found a pool, and that's the pool that you can see here. And that goes, that pool is interesting to the archaeologists, because what they find in the pool is that there's a lot of white material that they don't know what it is, basically made of lime, but some sort of lime that the archaeologists don't know exactly what it is. And the other thing is they don't even know what it's for. They realize this place wasn't used for drinking. There's something else, something was made over there or processed, but they don't know what it is. So what they do, this is actually how it looks today. I wanted to show you this. And the pool that they excavate is this pool, this big pool here. And you can see that it's sealed. So someone sealed it, and there's a small wall next to it. And some of the stones next to the wall, and some other stones here on top, the archaeologists realized someone used them, and they, from a lot of use, they became very, very smooth. That means that someone rubbed something on the stone or beat the stone with something, but they don't know what it is. They really have no idea. They're really baffled about what it is. And here I put a photo just to show you. Because of security reason, one of the arches actually started collapsing. They had to take it apart and reconstruct it back together. And as a kid, I know I always tried to put stones together and make a small arch. And it's actually really hard, and all the time it falls. You have to be really, really stable. So how do you build an arch this size? So this is the way. This is how they took it apart and rebuilt it in the old way. You make the same size of an arch with wood, a wooden arch, and you place the stones one by one on top of it until you put the middle stone, and then you can either in the old age burn the wood, or nowadays just take it apart and you have the standing arch. So today, as you saw in this slide, they're very nicely and tightly placed, and there's no real fear that they'll fall or collapse or whatever. Mind you, these arches were standing there for 2,000 years, or almost 2,000 years, and didn't collapse. And probably when modern people came over and started cultivating the fields above it, more water started sliding down, and then the fear of them collapsing appeared, and then they had to take it apart. But as you can see, that pool, that was the thing that really, really caught the curiosity of the archaeologists. And they had no idea. So what do you do when you have no idea? you bring someone who does have an idea. So firstly, the chief archaeologist, Chaim Ben David, he brought in a guy who wasn't an archaeologist, but was considered an expert in ancient technologies. And that guy is this fellow, Yeshu Drey. And Yeshu came over, looked at it, thought about it, and then decided that this pool was used to whiten, I forgot the word, pishtan, which is, I forgot the word slipped out of my mind for now, just lint. It's lint, right? Lint cloth. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this cloth is usually yellowish.
Right,
yeah, yellowish.
Here, someone wrote here flax. I know it's linen.
Yeah, and if if you're a priest, or if you're a king or highborn or whatever, you want to be dressed with white clothing, you take your cloths to somewhere and they make it white, or you buy it white, and that's like the Gucci of the day at that time in the Roman era, and it's probably very expensive. And once realizing that, they realized that this village was probably pretty rich, and that's why they could afford to build such big structures. Later on, as they dug the place, they realized, and I'll go back, they realized that this pool down here was used together with a pool next to it and another arch, and you can see here on the corner a beginning of another arch. They decided not to reconstruct it to show how it was built before, and the status they found it before. And what archaeologists are realizing these days is that the third arch, which was used probably for the whitening, collapsed long before, about 100 years before they actually built the current synagogue that we're going to see soon. So basically the wealth did not come from that. However, the village was probably pretty wealthy in any case. So let's get on. Once Yeshu arrived at the site, Chaim Ben David took him to see these ruins and told him, I wish I could excavate here. I wish I could see what was here. And one thing, if you have ever participated in an archaeological excavation, is that you do most things by hand. And some of these stones here are roughly weighing somewhere between 0.5 ton to 4 tons, which means that doing it by hand is almost impossible. And most archaeologists basically excavated a little bit in this place, but didn't really dig up the whole place. Yeshu had an idea. If you want to dig this place, that's not a big deal. All you have to do is bring a crane, put 2 rails on the sides, and then move all the stones, all these stones with the crane, and there you go, you can work easily. The problem with doing that is that archaeologists, as you know, have to document everything. You can't just move a stone without documenting it. And then Yeshu offered another solution, and that was attaching a laser scanner to the crane and scanning the whole place layer by layer. So you get to know exactly where is everything. The big stones would get another thing that was a new idea for archaeologists, is to connect or drill a small hole in the stone and put in an electronic chip, which will allow you to scan. While you scan, get a reading and know which stone was where, and then you can actually, with a computer, figure out where it came from. And that's what they did. And this is the picture they got. So this is one of the first pictures. You can see a rubble of stones, and this is not a picture. This is a computer scanning using a laser. And gradually, they start removing stones, and you're starting to get to see that there's a structure here. This structure is interesting. You can see the square of the structure, but you can also see walls in it. And you can also see, if you look on the top, you can see how the stones are kind of aligned to the wall. And you can basically see that the whole wall fell here outwards. Everyone thought the building collapsed inwards. And then when you look at this, you actually realize that it fell outwards. Another thing they found was that there was an underground chamber in the synagogue at one of the corners. It's kind of quite a big chamber. What they found in the chamber were certain tools and other things. They didn't find any gold in there, but we know now that this was the village safe. That's where the village would put its money and all its treasures and stuff like that. And they found a few interesting things there. I'm not going to get into it, but they didn't find any gold in there. In a couple of other synagogues in the Golan Heights, they did find gold in a sort of a similar chamber. And that's what we have here. As you can see, they started with using the crane, they started taking out stones, and they started finding interesting stones, like the ones you see there, the white and the black ones. They're all black, but because they sat in the soil for a long time, they look a bit brighter. Later on, when they get cleaned, they'll show black. The basalt rock, the same as the rest of the synagogue. And gradually they found columns of, 2 rows of columns, an interesting floor to the place. You can see the rails here of the crane. This is how it looks from the front. And basically what they found is the base of the wall was intact. All they had to do is put all the stones aside and then gradually return them to their place. And that's from an aerial shot. You can see how gradually the synagogue is built. In Hebrew, it's called lekomem. It's not to reconstruct, it's to put back the stones where they were before. So basically, it's the same stones. I don't have to make new stones that would look like the original ones, because I have all the original stones in place. If you can, and also you can see in this photo that there's a lot of rubble around the synagogue. Some of it belongs to the synagogue, some of that belongs to other buildings, and this is only the first floor of the synagogue. One other interesting thing is, and here you can see it nicely, most of the synagogues in the Golan Heights don't have a mosaic on the floor, unlike the ones in the Galilee and in the Israel Valley, for instance, the Valley synagogues, which have a remarkable mosaics on the floor with amazing drawings. In the Golan Heights, we don't find that. What we find is mostly a basalt rock, a tile rock, rock tile floor, and this is the case here. However, they probably wanted to make something interesting, and they made this circle of stones in the middle of the synagogue. The middle stone in this circle is the dead center of the synagogue, which is interesting. The other thing they found, and you can see it here in the floor, you can see on the top part here, there's a hole, and underneath the hole, there's another piece of a column, and also on the bottom, there's one. What they found, and this is interesting, this synagogue was built during the 6th century, meaning, or in the 5th or 6th century, meaning it's late. It's in the late Byzantine era, almost before the Muslims arrive. And that's a very late synagogue. And we thought originally the village was much older. And in order to prove that, what they had to do is remove the floor. And then they found another row of columns. And they figured out eventually that there's an older synagogue beneath this synagogue. The proof for that was when they found one of the corners of the synagogue where there were seats. And these seats made us realize there's another synagogue below it. Another thing is it's very uncommon for Jewish people to build a synagogue in that area on top of something that wasn't a synagogue. We don't find synagogues built on top of pagan temples or I don't know, some other things that is not Jewish and not pure. And that's the case here as well. So we know there's another synagogue below it, but they took it apart, or it fell apart, and they built a bigger synagogue on top of it. And this is probably one of the most interesting, or not one of the most, this is the most interesting thing, in my opinion, in this synagogue, which makes it amazing. We know in synagogues that there was a place where you put the Bible, the Torah, and you open it you take it out on Saturdays, read from it. But in all of the synagogues that were found from that era, we don't find a cabinet or anything that would resemble something that you'd put the Bible in it. And in this synagogue, basically, they found a whole building, a whole structure. It wasn't intact, it was all scattered all over the place, but they reconstructed it. Other than two stones here that are not original, and that's actually this eagle on this side. This eagle and the bottom part of the column, not original. We didn't find them in this place. Also, the other eagle that you see on the other side, which is original, wasn't found in a synagogue. It was found outside of the synagogue in a Syrian structure that was built in the 60s, in the early 60s, but they brought it in. The base of the column was also found earlier, and no one knew exactly what it was. So it was taken to the Katzrin Museum, and they didn't really know what it was until they discovered this thing, this structure. So what is this thing actually? What is this structure? Other than being a place to put the Bible in, you don't really need such a big structure for that. You can put a wooden cabinet, it would be enough. Why do you need to build something huge like this? And there are a lot of symbols on it as well, which have a significant meaning. And here you can see more clearly the columns on both sides with all the inscriptions on them. Look at the way it's carved. I don't know how many of you have ever tried carving a basalt rock, but this is one of the hardest things to do. I tried it with a diamond disc and I ruined it. It's really hard. And to get to this level of inscriptions on a basalt rock, this size is amazing, and the accuracy here is amazing as well. You can see all these lines, they're very amazing. But other than these nice drawing and flowers and all those, on top of these columns there are two squares with something much more significant. And you can see it here on the top of this column. Oops, it skipped to the right place. You can see here on two sides, they're not similar. In general, the whole structure is not symmetric, other than the one stone with the eagle that was actually copied from the original one. But these two, what is the meaning of this? What do they represent? So you can see here the lamp from the temple, and notice that it has 3 legs, which is something that repeats itself in all Jewish synagogues from that era. Mind you, at the same time this was made in Rome, in Titus Gate, the lamp is shown completely differently. It's shown with a huge podium. I don't know how many angles it has, but I think it has 8 sides, I think. I'm not sure. But here you can see that it has 3 legs, and that's constant to a lot of synagogues in Israel. So we had the lamp from the temple, and also what we have here is a tool from the temple called machta, and that's this hammer-looking thing. And it has, we have here also the four arbata minim, the four, how do you call it? I don't know how
4
you say it.
species.
Sorry?
4 species.
The 4 species for Sukkot. So you got the etrog, lulav, hadas, and arava together, bind together. And on the other one here, you can also see a shofar. Oops. Here, you can see a shofar. Why do you need all these symbols together? Why not just, put the menorah and somewhere else put the 4 species and the machta somewhere else? Here they were put together. The whole bunch of them were put together in both sides. And I'll go back to the drawing. And basically, we have to think of the period where this was made. And we're talking about a period where the temple was ruined. The Jewish people waited for about 70 years. They were expecting to see the temple rebuilt. There was a rebellion. Everyone was hoping the rebellion would be successful. It wasn't. And then another 70 years pass, and there's no temple. There's no going back to a Jewish kingdom that they grew up on stories on the Jewish kingdom, the Hasmonite kingdom that was there. And so they thought of something that would remind people that there's a temple that needs to be rebuilt. So when you walk into the synagogue and you look and you pray, and in that period in the Byzantic era, there's already prayers similar to what we know today, because before that, in synagogue, they didn't pray like we do today together. But after the temple was ruined, the prayer started to emerge as we know it today. And so you stand towards Jerusalem, and the whole structure is aimed towards Jerusalem. You look at this, and you see all these nice things, but also something on top of everything that reminds you that the temple used to be, and you should think of rebuilding it. So that's that. That's these symbols. That's what they mean. Another thing you see is the eagles. Now, for most Israelis, when they see these eagles, they say, hang on, what is this eagle doing here? That's a Roman symbol. So you have to remember that when this was built, the Romans are long gone. And the people who rule the country are Christians. And for them, this eagle doesn't mean anything. And for the Jews, they go back to remember that in the Bible, there's a lot of mentioning of eagles. Today, it's kind of a complicated translation, but it's an esher. And there's a lot of phrases in the Bible mentioning eagles, and also eagles are connected to our salvation, or Yeshua Shelan. So what we think was here was reminder of the temple, and the eagles in both sides to remind us that we hope one day we'll come back and have our own kingdom here, and the temple will be rebuilt, and everything will go back to how it was. So that's what it symbols. You can see how it's placed in a synagogue. It's big. This synagogue was built with 2 floors, and that's how this is how archaeologists suggest it was built. 2 floors. There's no separations. There's no floor between them. So there's no second floor on the top side. It's a huge space, one big space. Also, another thing that is missing from this place is, and I get asked about it a lot, is where are the women? Where do they sit? Where do they stay? We don't know. We don't know whether women came to synagogue all together. We do have in the Talmud mention of women in the synagogue, so we assume some of them came, or a lot of them came. We don't know, but there's no separation in the synagogue. So for women and men, there's no mention of it. We couldn't find anything to show that there was a separation. One last thing before I let you ask a question. What was it used for? What was the synagogue used for? So you have to remember, this is the biggest structure in the village. This is the only place where you can have a lot of people together. Most houses are much smaller. Most structures are much smaller. So this is the only structure that you can be in together with a lot of people. So this was firstly made for prayers, but synagogues are also used for internal affairs. The judges of the community would sit in the synagogue and decide on things. The elders also met there and decided things for the village. Also, one other thing that was a custom is to sit in the entrance of the synagogue. Beggars used to sit just outside the synagogue and would get charity. That was a custom to give charity to people, the poor people, at the entrance of the synagogue. And the last things would be probably to have a wedding there and a brit milah and stuff like that, circumcision. I would like to end this by saying I got married in a synagogue like this in Katzrin. And for me, I don't come from a religious family, but for me to get married in a 2,000-year-old or 15,000-year-old synagogue was really exciting. It was really meaningful. And also here, when you come to this place, even if you don't pray, if you're not religious, you stand in this place and the feeling is amazing. It's you feel like this is one of the places that really get to feel your Jewish roots here, and it's an extraordinary feeling. And a lot of people who come here, a lot of people come to visit, ask if they can pray in this place, and of course they can. And a lot of people come and usually pray one of the prayers depending on when they come. This is probably how it looked. It had windows on the top, and it had 3 entrances, not just one main entrance and 2 other smaller ones. And that's it. And if you have any questions, then I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, guys, you can either raise your hand or click the question and answer app if anyone has questions. I'll just say, Yaniv, first of all, thank you very, very much. There is outside of the synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, some sort of craving of a tiger or a cat, which made people think maybe this isn't something Jewish. It's not something usually you see in Jewish sites. Can you maybe say a word about that, about the argument? Is this place
yeah, well, okay, so hang on, I think I can stop sharing now. I can see, yeah. There's a few things. There's firstly on the steps at the entrance. Maybe I can share that photo. There's a stone with a lion and something that looks like a turkey or whatever kind of a bird, and that's over there in a secondary use. So that's we don't know whether it's something that was shown in the synagogue. So that was hidden probably, but we have on one of the windows we have a lion. And again, this connects, the lion connects to the fact that these are symbols that are no longer Roman, and a lion would represent the kingdom. A lion would represent the Judea kingdom, which we all aspire to go back to. And probably the people that lived there at the time were influenced by the Christian surroundings, but they didn't fear that this would in any way damage their Jewishness or their religion, as well as the eagles. I mean, you don't expect to see eagles in a synagogue or any kind of these kind of images. But if you go to the synagogues where there's mosaics, you'll find there a lot more drawings of people, even the wheel of, come on, the wheel that, I forgot the word, the wheel that for the month of the year.
The year cycle.
Circle of, the Sagittarius and all these things with images. So at that time, probably Jews didn't feel they have to worry about this thing.
Okay, 3 questions coming in. How long of a drive is it from the main highway?
From the main highway, well, depends on what you consider a main highway.
Yeah, talking about the Golan. So.
It's the Golan Heights, yeah. So basically, I guess from Tel Aviv to Keshatot would take you about, maybe if you drive slow, 2 hours. 2.5 hours. Nowadays, with the new roads, it's a bit quicker. It's about 25 minutes from the lake, from the Sea of Galilee, I guess. And it's right close to Moshav Natur. You just drive around the Moshav road that surrounds the Moshav, and I don't know, maybe 10 minutes drive, even less. So it's you have to want to go there. It's not on the road. It's not something that you just pass through and go into. And I'd guess you would want to be there, for at least a couple of hours to see the place.
Okay, before I continue the questions, we have a few. First of all, Akiva says it's a zodiac. Akiva, you're saving our English today.
Yeah, zodiac.
I'll just say, earlier today
the Wheel of Fortune got stuck in my mind and I couldn't think.
So I'll just say the area of Natur was, first of all, you have En Keshatot, which, as Yaniv explained, can take you a good couple of hours. And just nearby, you have some dairy farms and other interesting things to see and do and eat. So you can spend a whole day in that area. Okay, how old is the original village?
Well, as I said, we think the original village started in the days of Alexander Yanai, which means it's somewhere around 100 BC. And the synagogue itself, the older synagogue, is somewhere around the 4th century. And the newer synagogue, the one you actually walk into today, is from the end of the 5th century or the 6th century. So it's a late one. I didn't say one thing that I said in the beginning. Everything ended basically in a huge earthquake that occurred in 749, the year 749. Basically, there was a huge earthquake in Israel, and a lot of the cities got ruined, like Beit She'an, for instance, and never recovered from that earthquake, as we know. The other thing you have to realize about this village is, if you look at the known world at the time, En Keshatot is basically in the center of the world. You have Europe on one side, the Roman Empire, and then later on the Byzantine Empire. And on the other side, you have the Persians and other kingdoms on the other side, and they're right in the middle. So a lot of goods passed through this village. A lot of people that wanted to go from one side of the world to the other passed through this village, which made it pretty wealthy. In general, this area used to be very, very wealthy. Yeah, you can see on the map.
Via Maurice and the Kingdom Highway. Okay, the question here, and I'll stop sharing my screen. Would funerals take place there? Not the burial, but the service.
I don't know that there was a service. We don't really know. But they found a burial area that hasn't been excavated much to the south of the village. Usually in Jewish life, you don't deal with the dead inside the village. I don't think they would bring it into the synagogue. That's one thing I'm pretty sure they wouldn't do. But in general, even if they had a service or whatever, I don't think they would do it in the village. I think they'd go outside the village with that.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions, so I'll just say, last time I was on site with Yaniv, we discussed, our head of the regional council today made an announcement last year that he wants to double the size of the population of the Golan within a decade. Just so you understand, today in the Golan, we're talking about roughly 26,000 Jews. The times Yaniv just described to you, we're talking about how many people?
Around 220,000 Jews living only in the center and south of the Golan.
So I don't know if we want these numbers today, but we can just dream of reaching, and when we reach those numbers maybe, or even just double the amount, we can talk about a highway in the Golan.
Or
So
train.
I'm just going to end with sharing it. While I say thank you to Yaniv, I'll just end with sharing the screen again, just to give you the details of the site, so you can know when you can visit, when God willing, lockdown is over, and you all can really come back to Israel. The site, if you want an English instructor, you need to pre-order it. So you can see here the opening, the entrance hours, the website, Facebook, location and ways. It's accessible. There is an elevator there, and they also have these little ATVs that take you down if you need that. And with that said, thank you everyone for joining us. It really was a pleasure. You can keep on, stay posted on our Facebook group from Golan with love. You can constantly send it. We've got requests from different communities, different organizations wanting links. So anything we had today, you're welcome, including this incredible conversation. You're welcome to request. We'll send it to you. And towards next Sunday, let us know what else you want us to discuss. We have great speakers, great content, and we want to adapt it to you. So, guys, have a great day. Thank you very much, Yaniv, again. It was a pleasure. And we hope to see you here in person as soon as possible.
Yes.